There was no mistaking the stench. You could smell it from a mile away long before you saw the dark silhouette swinging gently in the wind. A twisted iron cage hung from a tall wooden post, creaking softly as its gruesome occupant slowly decomposed under the sun. This was no ordinary execution. This was a warning, performance of power and cruelty, a message to every passerby that crime would not go unpunished. Welcome to the terrifying world of the gibbet. For much of history, the punishment for serious crimes was death. But in some parts of Europe, death alone was not considered enough. It wasn't just about justice. It was about humiliation, fear, and control. After the criminal was hanged, his body was sometimes placed into an iron cage and suspended from a high post, usually in a public space where as many people as possible could witness the horror. Cages were called gibbets, and the men or women left inside them became grotesque signposts of authority. Gibbeting was not a quick punishment. It didn't kill you. In fact, that was kind of the point. If the person was placed in the gibbet to live on, this did happen, they would suffer unimaginably. Dying slowly from dehydration, exposure, or infection, birds would peck at their eyes. Insects would lay eggs in their wounds, and yet they were left to hang, slowly wasting away, piece by piece, limb by limb, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for years. But even if the victim was already dead, the effect was no less chilling. Slowly rotting corpse in a rusting iron shell was a sight few could forget. The idea was simple. If you stole from the king, if you murdered a neighbor, if you committed piracy or highway robbery, you might pay not just with your life, but with your corpse. Authorities wanted people to be afraid not just of death, but of what came after. And for many religious societies, this mattered. In Christian doctrine, the body was supposed to be buried properly. Defiling it after death, leaving it to rot above ground, denying it the peace of the grave was a punishment with spiritual consequences. It was a way to say, you don't even deserve rest. Gibbets often stood at crossroads, near town entrances, along riverbanks, or by the gallows themselves. They were impossible to ignore. Traveling merchants, pilgrims, farmers, even children walking to market would pass under the shadow of these grim totems. In some places, entire hillsides were turned into graveyards in the air, dotted with swaying corpses in rust-covered cages. Imagine the psychological impact of walking through such a landscape. Imagine the fear it would instill in you, knowing your fate could be the same. There was a whole industry around it. Blacksmiths were paid to make custom-fit iron cages. No, two bodies were quite alike, and so every gibbet had to be made specifically for the person it was meant to hold. These cages were not elegant or clean. They were crude, heavy, sharp-edged contraptions of iron straps and bolts, designed to hold the body upright and visible as it decayed. The design had to be sturdy enough to keep birds from carrying away parts of the corpse too quickly. The longer the display lasted, the better, but there were complications. Bodies decay, they stink, they leak, they attract rats and flies and carrion birds. Sometimes limbs would fall off and hit the ground below. Sometimes bones would be scattered by dogs. People, being people, would often dare each other to go touch the gibbet at night, throw stones at it, or steal souvenirs like teeth or fingers. Authorities sometimes had to assign guards just to keep people from messing with the remains. Over time, communities began to see these gruesome displays not just as warnings, but as nuisances. Despite the horrors, gibbeting wasn't used everywhere or all the time. It was most common in England and Scotland during the 1700s and 1800s, though versions of it existed across Europe and even in parts of colonial America. It was especially favored for crimes that were seen as particularly heinous or threatening to the social order. Highwaymen, for example, were often gibbeted. These were men who robbed travelers on the roads, often with violence, and they were feared and hated by the upper classes. Pirates, too, were commonly put in cages at river mouths or docks, where every ship coming into port would see the consequences of challenging royal authority. The famous pirate Captain Kidd was gibbeted after his execution in 1701. His body was dipped in tar to slow decomposition and then hung in a cage by the River Thames. For years, sailors passing by saw his blackened skeleton swinging above the water, a gruesome reminder of the crown's reach. In one sense, he was more useful dead than alive. His corpse became a tool of empire. Some of the most notorious gibbets even became landmarks. People would name crossroads after them: Gibbet Hill, Gallows Corner, Dead Man's Cross. In some cases, gibbeted corpses were left hanging for so long that their iron cages rusted into the bones, fusing with them and creating grotesque sculptures of death. Children would grow up under their shadows, and local legends would form around the gibbet tales of ghosts, curses, and revenge from beyond the grave. Over time, however, public sentiment began to shift. The Enlightenment brought new ideas about justice and dignity. The spectacle of gibbeting came to be seen by many as barbaric. It offended growing notions of human rights. It also posed real problems for sanitation and public health, especially in crowded towns. The smell alone could make nearby homes unlivable, and so the practice slowly faded away. In England, the last known gibbeted body was hung in 1832. After that, the law changed. Execution was still practiced, but the bodies were buried or donated to medical science rather than displayed like trophies. Still, the legacy of the gibbet lingers. Some old gibbets have been preserved in museums. Others are remembered in local folklore. The idea of a body left to rot in a cage remains one of the most chilling symbols of medieval and early modern justice. It reminds us that punishment was not just about the criminal, it was a performance for the crowd, kind of theater, with death as its main actor. What makes the gibbet so disturbing is not just the gore. It is the cruelty behind it. The intentional denial of peace. The use of the human body as a billboard. It's the idea that your corpse could still serve a purpose, not to honor your life, but to destroy your legacy. It was meant to erase you, to make you a monster in the memory of your community. And yet, in a dark twist of irony, some of those who were gibbeted became legendary. Their names survived. Their stories were passed down. They became folk heroes or villains, depending on who was telling the tale. In death, they gained a kind of immortality. Not the one they wanted, perhaps, but one they couldn't escape. To look at an old gibbet cage today is to peer into a brutal past. It is to see how power was enforced, how fear was weaponized, and how death was turned into a public ritual. These cages were not just metal, they were statements, and they spoke loudly to anyone who dared step out of line. You didn't want to end up in one, not just because of the pain, not just because of the humiliation, but because of what it meant. That even in death, you were not free. That your body, your face, your bones would be on display, your legacy eaten by crows. You would become not a person, but a lesson. In the end, the gibbet was not about justice. It was about dominance. It was about making sure everyone else got the message. And centuries later, that message still chills the bone. Thanks for joining us on this chilling journey into the grim world of gibbet cages and the rotting corpses they once held. It is hard to imagine a time when punishment was not just about justice, but also about sending a stomach-turning message to everyone who passed by. The wind whistling through rusted iron bars, the buzz of flies. The skeletal remained swaying in the breeze. These weren't just macabre details. They were deliberate, haunting tools of control. If this dive into the darker corners of history left you shocked, curious, or even a little unsettled, then you are not alone. The past is full of things that can still make our skin crawl, and that is exactly why we keep coming back to it. There is always another forgotten horror waiting just behind the curtain of time. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what eerie bit of history you want to explore next. Maybe next time we will look at the screaming skulls of haunted manors or the rituals that sent shivers down medieval spines. Till then, stay curious, stay brave, and never stop digging up the past.